Good morning to those in the auditorium, and good morning to those that are joining us by way of live stream. We're just a tad late this morning, but beautiful morning. Good morning to be doing anything, but particularly it's a good morning to be here in the congregational hall and being in Bible class and getting ready for worship hours later on this morning. Our study this morning is in the 18th verse of the first chapter of Lamentations. I want to start by thanking Ned for filling in last week. Those of us some of us at CYC joined the class, Ned's class, by way of live streaming. Ned, you did a great job and appreciate that. We had worship service last Sunday morning at 7:30, so that may be a precedent. We might want to start here, Tim, at 7:30 and get everybody awake early. Since we've been a couple weeks since we've been in a study of Lamentations here in the auditorium, we might just take a little time to review. Lamentations is a book of poems, as we've said before. The author of Lamentations, Jeremiah, no doubt, was, I don't know whether he had to be inspired, and he had to be inspired to put this book in interesting order. The verses begin with, some of the verses begin with a secession of the Hebrew alphabet. It's my understanding that there are some sects of the Jews, even today, especially today, I suppose, use this book or read this book in certain feast days or for certain religious days. Obviously, actually, the Book of Lamentations really is introduced by the last part of the book of Jeremiah. But as we've discussed before, and as you know, the book talks about the fall of Jerusalem. And that might not mean much to us today because, that's ancient history. But if you thought about, how those folks would have thought, and particularly how Jeremiah would have responded to that, let's suppose all of our national monuments were destroyed in one fell swoop. The Capitol buildings, the monuments and so forth, and the various trademarks of our country were destroyed. People would be in a terrible state of mourning. And so this was real to those folks, and particularly it was real to Jeremiah, because Jeremiah tried his best to convert the people of Jerusalem. That was his career. His whole career had to do with trying to get the people of Jerusalem back on the law of Moses track. And he warned them over and over again that as a result of sin, destruction is going to follow. And that he repeatedly preached that they didn't respond, and Jerusalem then eventually was destroyed. Jerusalem was under siege for about 18 months. The travels in and out of the city cut off for about a year and a half. Think of what would happen if we followed the beltway around Columbus and all the supplies were cut off for 18 months. When the supplies are cut off for 3 days, people panic. Is that right? We've experienced a little bit of that in this COVID deal, where store shelves begin to become empty. But think of 18 months. Let's suppose all the stores were closed for 18 months. Nobody going in and out of the city for 18 months. We'd be in a terrible world of hurt. And so that's the situation there. Cannibalism taking place. All kinds of attempts to, get something to eat. And the Babylonian, it was just a matter of time then until the Babylonian military came in and destroyed the whole thing. This nation had existed for over 350 years. The temple had been, there for centuries. And the Jews thought that's not ever going to be destroyed. So this book was written in a way that in succeeding generation of Jews and for all people of all time, it would be a reminder of this concept that destruction follows sin. In the 18th verse of the first chapter of Lamentations, the Lord is righteous, for I have rebelled against his commandment. Now, the Lord is righteous. There was a recognition among the Jews, at least some of them, that God was just in destroying the city because of their sin. The Lord is righteous, the writer says, for I have rebelled against his commandment. This destruction is due to the rebellion. Now hear I pray you, all the people. Hear I pray you, all the people. And behold my sorrow. My virgins and my young men are gone into captivity. That's Jerusalem personified there. I called for my lovers. Now, who were the lovers in terms of nations around about? Their allies, or their supposed allies. How quickly the allies of various nations change. An Air Force pilot took some munitions to a country in South America at the command of the government. On the way back from that particular country, the crew heard on the radio that we changed alliances within the country. And so actually the order was to deliver to a certain group, the munitions and so forth, but diplomatically the United States changed sides. And so the new enemy had the munitions, you see. Well, that's the way it is with nations. And particularly that was the way it was with Jerusalem. They tried to get the Egyptians to help. They tried to get the Moabites to help. The Ammonites, the Edomites. But obviously that didn't. These allies, or supposed allies, they're lovers. And of course they had no business depending on those nations anyway. But they're lovers, they're allies. They forsook them. Not only did they forsake them, they had a good feeling about Jerusalem being destroyed, as we'll see. I called for my lovers. You can imagine when the armies were encamped around. If those nations had had any real respect for Jerusalem, they would have been trying to get in and out of the city. They've been trying to break up part of the military encounter of the Babylonians. I called for my lovers, but they deceived me. My priest and my elders gave up the ghost in the city. The people that were supposed to be leading, not only some of them died, but they gave up. They no longer led. While they sought their meat to relieve their souls. Particularly these leaders were in a position to get the food, right? Isn't that the way it kind of is? The leaders, they have connections. Leaders have connections. They know how to manipulate, at least those leaders apparently did. But they were likewise without meat, or without food, without sustenance. Behold, in verse 20, O Lord, behold, O Lord, for I am in distress. My bowels are troubled. My seat of emotions, my emotions are drained. Mine heart is turned within me. Their stomachs were churning. The problems in the pit of their stomach. They were emotionally drained, physically drained, spiritually drained. I have grievously rebelled abroad. The sword bereaveth. At home there is as death. See, they recognized that their punishment here was what was grievous. But in the next chapter, I think the author, particularly in chapter 3, the author was saying, I know we deserve punishment because of our sin, but do we deserve this much? That'll come out in this next, in one of the next chapters here. Do we deserve this much punishment? But they recognized the punishment was a result of their doings. So behold, O Lord, for I am in distress. My bowels are troubled, mine heart is turned within me. For I have grievously rebelled abroad. The sword bereaveth. At home there is as death. Verse 21, they have heard that I sigh. There's none to comfort me. I'm sighing, I'm in distress, and none to comfort me. Why would there be none to comfort them? Everybody else was, in the dire straits as they were. They have heard that I sigh. There is none to comfort me. All mine enemies have heard of my trouble. And he's probably now talking about the nations around about there. They are glad that thou hast done it. Now, here's the previous allies. They're glad that Jerusalem is in distress. Now, do you suppose, this is a conjecture, but do you suppose that if America, if our country is in a world of hurt, was devastated, how many of the allies would really be, how many of them would really be upset about that? You think there'd be some that would be kind of glad, even though, as a matter of foreign policy, the country has helped nation after nation? Do you suppose that some of those nations that have been helped would be kind of glad to see the demise? But just think about that. Mine enemies have heard of my trouble. They are glad that thou hast done it. Now, apparently, at least some of those nations around about understood that Jehovah God, the God of Israel, the God of Jerusalem, the God of the temple, don't you suppose they knew that there was some connection between this destruction and God's hand in the destruction? I would think they would. I mean, the temple was one of the wonders of the world at that time. And people understood that the Jewish God, Jehovah God, was connected with that society. Well, that will bring let's read that again. All mine enemies have heard of my trouble. They are glad that thou hast done it. They recognize that God was involved in this. Thou wilt bring the day that thou hast called or predicted, and they shall be like unto me. Was this day of reckoning ever mentioned to the Jews? Continually, this day of reckoning was at least in the back of their minds. Let all the wickedness come before thee, and do unto them as thou hast done unto me. Now, what's the idea there? Those nations that are round about, those nations that are glad that Jerusalem has fallen, the temple has fallen, they are in trouble as well. God wasn't really in tune with those other nations. Those other nations weren't in tune with God. God was using them to punish the Jews. You know, God could have used fireballs. He could have directed a comet to destroy Jerusalem. I mean, he could have done a million things to destroy. He used, however, the nations around about to destroy Jerusalem. That didn't mean that God was favorable to them, or that they were in league with God or in spiritual relationship with God. No, that didn't mean any of that. Let all their wickedness, the prophet says, let all their wickedness come before thee, and do unto them as thou hast done unto me, for all my transgressions, for all my sighs are many, and my heart is faint. What a sad condition. Most people have had sad days. All right? Most people have had sad weeks and sad months. But continual sadness was the scenario here. Well, chapter 2 then focuses in on the suffering of the sanctuary, the temple, the religious aspects. In 1 Chronicles 28 and 2, maybe we ought to turn there. 1 Chronicles 28 and 2. It says, then King David, David the king, stood up upon his feet and said, hear me, my brethren and my people. As for me, I have had in my heart to build a house for the rest of the ark, for rest for the ark of the covenant of the Lord, and for the footstool of our God, and had made ready for the building. Let me read that carefully there. Then David the king stood up on his feet and said, hear me, my brethren and my people. As for me, I had in mine heart to build an house of rest for the ark of the covenant of the Lord, and for the footstool of our God, and hath made ready for the building. As you all know, David he had in mind to build the temple. He had in mind to do this great thing, but God said, no, your son will do it. But there, the point we want to look at is that the temple, possibly the Ark of the Covenant, was God's footstool. In the 99th Psalm, Psalm 99, verse 5, exalt ye the Lord our God, and worship at his footstool, for he is holy. Now, so temple, Ark of the Covenant, within the temple, the temple, the totality of the temple could have been the footstool. Now, why do I emphasize that? Because this is going to come up in chapter 2, as chapter 2 hones in on the suffering of the sanctuary, the temple, the religious center, the focus, religious focus in the Jewish economy. So chapter 2 says, how hath the Lord covered the daughter of Zion with a cloud of his anger? The daughter of Zion, the city, the people. He's covered this city with a cloud of his anger. Does God become angry? Apparently so. Then he says, and cast down from heaven unto the earth the beauty of Israel, and remembereth not his footstool in the day of his anger. So, what's the point? The beauty of Israel, the temple, the religious facilities and the religious trappings and the religious practices and all of that. That was the beauty of Israel. It was God's footstool. And the prophet is saying here, the author of the Lamentations, saying, the fact that this was the footstool of God didn't trump that God was going to destroy it. That was probably hard for the Jewish people to understand. But the very, the symbol of God in that social order was that complex. And the people around about knew it. But God destroyed it. His footstool. His own footstool, he destroyed it. The Lord has swallowed up, in verse 2, all the habitations of Jacob, and hath not pitied. It was not as if God was pitying what he did, or he was because of what Jerusalem did. He hath thrown down in his wrath the strongholds of the daughter of Judah. What were the strongholds in those days? The strongholds of the cities? They were the walls of the city, right? They were, that was their protection. He's thrown down the protection. The Babylonians destroyed the city. First they took down the walls. He hath brought them down to the ground. And when Nehemiah and Ezra, Zerubbabel came back from captivity, what did they find? The walls were gone. I mean, it was total destruction. They scorched scorched earth policy that they put in place. Complete destruction. He hath polluted the kingdom and the princes thereof. He's polluted the governmental structure, the trappings of government. He's just destroyed the whole culture, the whole social order, the facilities, everything. The leadership was gone. Everything was gone. The people, those that weren't killed, were carried away into captivity to live a very horrible life, except for a few kings, except for, was it King Jehoiachin, King Jehoiachin. I was trying to get Jehovah out. Thank you. These preachers are all right. They can help you. Except for Jehoiachin, he was eventually, he had been carried away into captivity, and the king of Babylon raised him up and fed him at his own table. But that that was the exception. That was an anomaly. It was that, those, when people, particularly the leadership, went into captivity, man, they weren't treated all that great. In verse 3, he hath cut off in his fierce anger all the horn of Israel. Horn typically stands for what? Anybody ever faced a bull? No, you city people. Oh, Mark, you might have had a little encounter with a bull. Okay, well, that's a good thing. Because if you've ever been horned by a bull, you know it's power. And so the horn was a symbol of military might. The military was gone. Civil government was gone. Everything was gone. He hath drawn back his right hand from before the enemy. God's right hand of protection for Jerusalem, for the Jews, for that social order. His right arm, his arm of protection, his right hand of protection was drawn back, and he let the enemies do their thing. And he burned against Jacob like a flaming fire, which devoureth round about. He has bent his bow like an enemy. He stood with his right hand as an adversary, and slew all that were pleasant in the eye, in the tabernacle of the daughter of Zion. He poured out his fury like fire. God was behind this military action. The Lord, in verse 5, the Lord was an enemy. It spells it out. The Lord was as an enemy. He has swallowed up Israel. He has swallowed up all her palaces. The great palaces of the kings, and all the palaces of the rich people, and all the homes of the poor people. He has destroyed his strongholds. They had more protections within the city than just the wall around about. Those were destroyed. He has increased in the daughter of Judah mourning and lamentation. And so there was a multitude of lamentations, a multitude of destructive powers. Verse 6, and he hath finally taken away his tabernacle, that is his tent or booth. And what was his tent or booth? It was the temple, as if it were of a garden. Now that's a strange situation there, but sometimes gardens have, little tool houses or little temporary buildings. Is that right? For their garden tools and that kind of thing. Well, it was just as if it was nothing. It was just he just destroyed it. His place of assembly, obviously the temple. And the Lord had caused the solemn feasts and the Sabbaths to be forgotten in Zion. Do you suppose the Jews, the faithful Jews, you suppose they look forward to those feast days? We have feast days, Thanksgiving, various holidays that, people pig out and that sort of thing. You kind of look forward to, there are certain times of the year there aren't any holidays and people kind of get what? Kind of get depressed and so forth. Well, let's suppose all of those days were wiped out for us. I mean, it would be sobering. It would be as if we had nothing to look forward to in terms of physical being. And let me get verse 6 again. And he hath finally taken away his tabernacle, as if it were of a garden, just a building, out in the garden. He hath destroyed his places of assembly. The Lord hath caused solemn feasts and Sabbaths to be forgotten in Zion, and hath despised in the indignation of his anger the king and the priest. Whether priest or king or whomever, in a world of hurt. Verse 7, and the Lord hath cast off his altar. What did they do with the altar when the Babylonians destroyed it? They broke up those fixtures of the temple. The things that carry away, the gold and the silver, they took away, but they broke up all of those, the altar, the fixtures. He hath, and of course God allowed that. And he hath abhorred his sanctuary. He hath given up into the hands of the enemy the walls of her palaces. They have made a noise in the house of the Lord, as in the day of solemn feast. Now, when people are, celebrating, there's laughter, right? There's good times. There's noise. But in verse 7, what's this noise referred to? The battle. The destruction. The clanking of stones coming down. That was the noise that happened there. Verse 8, the Lord hath purposed to destroy the wall of the daughter of Zion. Not only the physical wall, but any, he just destroyed the culture of the nation, everything. People carried away in captivity and so on. The Lord has purposed. Now, when it says the Lord has purposed, what's that mean? You had a plan. He was executing a plan. His plan. What had he done? What had he planned to do? Well, he had planned to destroy the wall of the daughter of Zion. He has stretched out a line. He hath not withdrawn his hand from destroying. God could have prevented destruction. He'd not withdrawn his hand from destroying. Therefore, he hath made a rampart and the wall to lament. They languish together. Now, a rampart has to do with military stuff, right? Has to do with, offensive. Taking the offensive. And the imagery here, the The rampart and the wall lament, they languish together. The personification here, the wall, which was a protection, the rampart, the military protection within the city. The imagery here is they came together and wept. Wept or wept? Well, you know what I'm saying. It was the city personified as the protections coming together, weeping. Her gates are sunk into the ground, referring to the walls there, the gates of the wall. He hath destroyed and broken her bars. Her king and her princes are among the Gentiles. Where were the people that were not killed? Where were they? They were among the Gentiles in captivity. The law is no more. Do you suppose the foreigners, do you suppose they had any respect for the law of Moses? Do you suppose they were aiding the captives in practicing the law of Moses? Probably just the reverse. Probably tried to keep them from any semblance of Jewish religious activity. The law is no more. Her prophets also find no vision from the Lord. What's that mean? The prophets found no visions from the Lord. No guidance, no revelation. Now, Ezekiel was in Babylon as a prophet, but by and large, the population didn't have any access to any vision or revelations or prophecies from the Lord. The elders of the daughter of Zion sit upon the ground. Here the folks that are supposed to be in a leadership capacity, they're sitting around on the ground. You see the imagery there? And they're kept silent. Their mouths are not moving. They're silent. They have cast up dust upon their heads. That's a sign of great mourning and destruction or hurt. They have girt themselves with sackcloth, another symbol of mourning, putting on sackcloth or just ragged kind of things. No fine, no the opposite of fine, silky stuff. The virgins of Jerusalem hang down their heads to the ground. Now the prophet seems to turn to himself and says, "Mine eyes do fail with tears. My bowels, or my emotions, are troubled. My liver is poured upon the earth." Some versions use bile. My bile is poured upon the earth. The idea there that they were in total mourning, total distress, just totally saddened for the destruction of the daughter of my people, because the children and sucklings swoon in the streets of the city. Well, the children and the sucklings, you can imagine, Ned.
How many thousands of times do you think the children of Israel heard the prophets tell them that if they rejected God, he was going to reject them? How many times he kept saying, "Listen, come back." Now they're paying the price.
Ned queries with the question of how many times have they been told that things would be bad if they didn't repent? And that's the recurring question. The imagery of Can you imagine this? Children in the streets with their mothers, infants with their mothers, no food. And you can imagine a mother trying to console the children. Not only that, but you can imagine some of the mothers were eating their children, the flesh of their children. I mean, this is hard to, in our social order, in our environment, here in Columbus, Ohio, it's just hard for us to imagine anything of that scope and breadth. And they say to their mothers, "Where is the corn? Mom, where's the food?" Where is the corn and the wine? When they swooned or fainted, as the wound in the streets of the city, when their soul was poured out into the mother's bosom. You can imagine children huddling around their mother with no comfort. Verse 13, "What things shall I take to witness for thee? What things shall I liken to thee, O daughter of Jerusalem? What shall I equal to thee, that I may comfort thee, O virgin daughter of Zion? For thy breach, thy breach, or wound, for thy wound is great like the sea." The wound wasn't just a scratch. It was a cleavage as big as the sea. How graphic that language is. The wound was as big as the sea. Verse 14, the prophet has seen vain and foolish things for thee. It says the prophets, plural, have seen vain and foolish things for thee, and they have not discovered thine iniquity to turn away thy captivity, but have seen for thee false burdens and causes of banishment. All that pass by clap their hands at thee, and they hiss and wag their head at the daughter of Jerusalem, saying, "Is this the city that men call the perfection or the highest of beauty, the joy of the whole earth?" Jerusalem, Judea, and all of Israel at one point in history were the envy of the nations. But now they wag their head, clap their hands. They're joyous. They're happy that Jerusalem has fallen. And this adds to the lament. This adds to the lament of the prophet and those that really care anything about their country and their history and so on. People around about say, well, here was the great nation. Now they're fallen. And we're happy about it. The Lord, in verse 17, hath done that which he hath devised. Notice that? That's like purpose again. Notice earlier in a previous verse, he used that term purpose. But he's devised it. The Lord hath done that which he hath devised. That devise, that purpose, was identified in the book of Deuteronomy. God said, if you do this, and this is evil, you're going to be destroyed. So that device, that purpose started back in the law of Moses. He hath fulfilled his word that he hath commanded in the day of old. He hath thrown down. See, he commanded in the day of old. Centuries before, he's warned them. Centuries before, he's warned them. He hath, Lord hath done that. I sense that we're finished. Not that I'm finished, but I see a flood of folks coming in, so that I must have. No. Okay. Betty says I can't hear. So I didn't hear that.